Hello and welcome. Describing himself as a bioartist, he became the first person to have a microchip implanted in his body as a form of social commentary. He's created a number of highly publicized works, often radically different and usually interactive. This week on One-on-One, meet the unique and pioneering artist, Eduardo Kac. The scientific approach to the artwork exhibited by Eduardo Kac is generally evident to those drawn to it, though his unique time capsule project involved him injecting technology into his body, a microchip in his ankle to be more precise, where it remains tucked discreetly away. Less discreet are his artistic pieces involving glowing animals, or the one entitled Genesis, which featured large-scale projections of bacteria growing with a gene implanted in it by cats. This project could be viewed closely over the internet, a medium favoured by Kac as a way to make his work globally interactive. He even connected a plant and a bird over the internet using audio equipment to allow them to communicate sounds. As science evolves, so too does the work of a man who calls himself a transgenic or bio-artist. Eduardo, great to talk with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I have to ask you, you're considered the father, the founding father of bioart, or sometimes called transgenic art. Explain what that is for people who don't understand it.
Bioart is a new art form. It's about 10 years old, and basically is an art form that uses life in a very biological sense. Art and life is a question that has always been intertwined, meaning artists have always been interested in working with life. But the difference is that here, life is not a metaphor. It's literally life like you and I.
Now, the thing is that it doesn't have any set pattern. I mean, it's a new art form, but also it's one that's evolving. And I wonder, when you look at bioart, how it's evolving.
Well, being 10 years old, it certainly benefits from developments in biotechnology in the sense of the creation of new media. Biotechnology in the last 10 years has enabled us to work with transgenics and cloning and tissue culture. And no doubt, there will be also new media, new biomedia developed in the future, and artists often explore these new media.
You took this very high-profile step about 10 years ago, 1997, of having a microchip implanted in you, in your body, as part of your project, the time capsule.
Yes.
And you still have it. It's in your ankle, in your leg.
Yes.
And you're saying this was to sort of look at the relationship between man and technology, or human beings, or biolife and technology as well. But you chose that particular place for a reason as well, which was interesting. So I just wanted to go through that.
Yeah, because I felt that in 1997, we were starting to see something different. Because throughout the 90s, we went through the digital revolution. We saw the rise of cell phones, we saw the popularization of digital networks. But I felt that something was changing by 1997, and I felt that we're moving into a post-digital paradigm. And in that paradigm, there is also a cultural shift that takes place in relation to memory. So I wanted to make a piece, an artwork, that would deal with memory as we inherited from the past, but also projected into the future. So what did I do exactly? In front of a series of sepia tone photographs from the past, from my family in the 30s.
So that old sepia black, sort of almost orangey black and white kind of effect.
Exactly, that always evoked the past.
Right.
Yeah? I implanted live on television and live on the internet a digital microchip. So what's the relationship between these two elements? One is the memory of the past that gets externalized. And through a slow process of identity formation, cultural debate, you internalize those memories. On the other hand, and quite literally on the hand, I had the microchip. In a few seconds, with no historical context, with no tradition, with no identity formation, with nothing, with just a gesture of injection, in a few seconds, dramatically and traumatically as well, boom, the microchip goes into the body. It's a memory microchip. It's a microchip that stores memory, digital information. So what's the relationship between the complex, subjective, processual internalization of those photographs and the abrupt internalization of digital memory. And the body, in this case, my body, becomes the interface where these two questions come together.
What, in your opinion, are the boundaries between science and art? Or what thresholds wouldn't you cross, for example?
Well, we have come to a level of specialization between the disciplines that throughout the history of humankind, that we see quite clearly that art is, in fact, quite distinct from science. In what ways, for example, today? Science is based on a hypothesis that goes through a series of tests, and then you arrive at a proof, meaning that your hypothesis has been demonstrated through these steps. And if that proof that you arrive at and those methods that you employ can be replicated by others, no matter where, then the notion of truth is built, is constructed, and then shared. It's really ultimately the sharing of that evidence that forms the idea of truth. That's how science basically works. Art doesn't work that way. Art is essentially individual. Art is a singularity. I, as an individual, subjectively, produce something that I cannot repeat, neither do I want to repeat. If others can duplicate that, that's usually called plagiarism.
Let's go back in time to your early life and take me through your early childhood memories. I mean, you had an interesting upbringing. You were brought up by your grandparents,
yes,
essentially. How did that early life, I mean, what are your earliest memories and how do you think they influenced what you are today?
Oh, tremendously. Because one thing that is always present in my memory is that they were always reading. They were always reading, and there was a sense of calm in the house, and a sense of curiosity. And I think that had a very strong impact in my life, because I started to read voraciously very early, because both of them were always reading. But there's another thing that was intriguing to me. As a young man, I noticed that there were different relationships between children and adults. While most adults basically told me as a child that I had to do this and that just because, end of story, my grandmother was not like that. My grandmother, if I actually had to do something specific, she would sit down and explain to me, why is it that I had to do that? So that I had an opportunity to understand what is it that was going on. And if I had a different opinion, she would listen and she would talk to me. Which means that also at a very early age, I understood that there were two ways to go about in the world. One is blindly. It is this way just because, end of story. And the other was through dialogue. And that I picked up from my grandmother. And that's something that later on, through reading, through study, through philosophy, I became interested in Buber and Bakhtin and other philosophers who also dealt with philosophy of dialogue. And many years later, without thinking about it, of course, only looking back, one can see that. But many years later, I started to work with communication as the core aesthetic element of my work.
Now, your grandmother, I think Pearl Shakir was her original name. Pearl Sugar, I think, was how she was known. She had actually fled Nazi Germany.
Yes.
One of the Jews fleeing Germany, ended up in Brazil with your grandfather.
Yes.
And looking at that time, I mean, obviously she went through a lot. What do you think, what qualities do you think she imparted in you, apart from the reading and so on? What do you think from the strength that she had to exhibit in going through what she did? What came back to you?
Yeah, well, I always talked to her because I was always in dialogue with her. And I was able to, in a sense, look at the world from her perspective. And just that alone was also extremely rich, to be able to transport myself to another space, to another time, and in spite of the generation gap, to be able to enter that world and have different feelings, to connect with another space and time, because of course Rio de Janeiro, the Copacabana beach, is far removed from the Warsaw of 1939. So to develop empathy, to have respect, not purely and simply because somebody told me so, but because she actually deserved respect. Respect not purely and simply through a monological, meaning one-directional command, but respect because what she stood for, the strength to start life with nothing and to build a world for herself, that earned my respect. And that's something that I carry with me today.
How did it affect you, or what were you told, I guess, and how did it affect you to know about the situation with your mother, that, you know, she'd married young, she had you, and then she left you with your grandparents, her parents, to bring you up?
Well, she didn't leave exactly because I was born, my mother was 21, which is a young age to have a child. Now we know this better, that one has to develop a career, has to have a vision, has to be educated. But in the 60s, it wasn't quite like that. So basically, she came back home as a child herself, in a way, which one is essentially a young person at that age. Eventually, she worked and she remarried, and then she built a life for herself. She was never that far, but it is true that essentially I was educated by my grandparents, and they are effectively my parents. So I never lost contact with my mother, but I have in the end a relationship that more of a brother-sister with my mother than son and mother, really.
Eduardo, don't go away. We're going to take a very short break here. We're back with more one-on-one with Eduardo Kac in just a moment.